You won't see many cars with a V4 engine, but when you do, there's something special. Most automakers avoid the V4 engine due to balance issues, excessive vibrations, and inefficient use of space, but that didn't stop some brands from experimenting with it. While the V6 engine became the go-to choice for power and efficiency, the V4 still made its mark, especially in high-performance and lightweight cars. Inspired by an article from /Gear, today we're diving into some of the fastest cars ever made with a V4 engine, including one that even set a racing record. If you love discovering hidden gems in the car world, make sure to like and subscribe. It means the world to us. Let's kick things off with a car that had massive attitude, a bold presence, and just enough power to make you smile: the Ford Capri. Now, it wasn't a tire-shredding monster like the Mustang, but for Europe, this was their version of a muscle car, and it had a V4 engine that could still hit 100 miles per hour. Not bad for something that was built to be affordable and fun. When Ford dropped the Capri in 1969, it was an instant success. People loved its long hood, sleek design, and the fact that it looked way faster than it actually was. And guess what? It sold over 400,000 units in just 2 years. By the time production wrapped in 1986, Ford had pumped out a whopping 2 million Capris. The V4-Powered Capri Mk1 was the first iteration, and while it wasn't breaking any speed records, it had character. It was light, sporty, and had that perfect balance between performance and affordability. But then came 1973, and everything changed. The oil crisis hit, and suddenly, big dreams of performance were getting crushed by the reality of rising fuel costs. Ford had to switch things up, ditching the V4 in favor of a V6, which made the next generation Capri even more exciting to drive. The Capri had a solid run, but by 1986, Ford decided to call it quits. And for decades, that seemed to be the end of the story. But then, Ford shocked everyone. In 2024, they brought the Capri back, this time as an electric car. A name that once stood for raw, gas-powered fun now carries an entirely new identity. Following up from the Ford Capri, let's talk about another V4-powered machine that made its mark, this time from Sweden. Enter the Saab Sonett III, a car that not only exceeded 100 miles per hour, but also helped Saab carve out a spot in the American sports car scene. But getting there wasn't exactly smooth sailing. It all started with the original Saab Sonett, which was just a prototype from 1955 to 1958. It never made it to production because Saab decided to focus on a sportier version of its 93 saloon instead. But as European sports cars gained popularity in the US, Saab couldn't ignore the opportunity. So in 1966, they introduced the Sonett II. And let's just say it wasn't exactly a hit. It had a design that was unique, to put it kindly. And the sales numbers reflected that. Realizing they needed a serious redesign, Saab went back to the drawing board. And in 1970, at the New York Auto Show, they unveiled the Sonett III. This version was sleeker, sharper, and, most importantly, more appealing to buyers. Under the hood, it packed a 1.5-liter V4 engine from Ford, producing 65 horsepower and pushing it to a top speed of 106 miles per hour. With its lightweight fiberglass body, sharp handling, and respectable speed, the Sonett III finally gave Saab a real sports car presence in the US. Over 8,000 units were built, proving that, when done right, a V4-powered sports car could still turn heads. From Saab's attempt at a sporty V4 to something even more unconventional, let's talk about a car that many have forgotten: the Matra M530. Matra wasn't your typical car manufacturer. Before getting into sports cars, they were known for building guided rockets and missiles. But in the late 1960s, they decided to shift gears and create something entirely different: a cheap, fun sports car for the French youth. The Matra M530 had all the quirks you'd expect from a company with a background in aerospace. It was lightweight, featured pedal-operated pop-up headlights, and even had a removable top. But what really made it stand out was its 1.7-liter Ford Taunus V4 engine. Paired with a fiberglass body that weighed just over 2,000 pounds, this thing was quick and nimble, hitting a top speed of 109 miles per hour. On paper, the M530 achieved its goal. It was fun, agile, and had a character that set it apart. But there was one problem. It wasn't as cheap as Matra had hoped. To fix that, they introduced the M530SX in 1971. Featuring a fixed roof and fixed headlights to cut costs. But even with the price drop, it struggled to compete with other sports cars of the time. In the end, only 9,609 EM530S were ever built before production ended in 1973. And now we arrive at the Ford Corsair, a car that, on paper, had everything going for it. It was meant to be Britain's answer to the Thunderbird, a sleek and stylish machine that would dominate the roads of the 1960s. Except, it didn't. Not even close. The problem? The engine. Ford, in their infinite wisdom, decided to shove a V4 under the bonnet, a powertrain that sounded like a bag of loose spanners being kicked down a flight of stairs. It rattled, shook, and vibrated so much that it felt like you were sitting inside a washing machine set to destroy. And here's where it gets even better. Ford had the absolute audacity to market the Corsair with the slogan, "Seen, but not heard." Which is fascinating, considering this thing sounded like a tractor struggling to escape from a metal scrapyard. Now, despite all this, the Corsair could actually move. It had a top speed of 110 miles per hour and decent acceleration. But none of that mattered, because let's face it, nobody wanted to drive a car that felt like it was powered by an off-balance blender. Instead, buyers turned to the Ford Cortina, which was cheaper, more comfortable, and, crucially, didn't sound like a lawnmower having an existential crisis. By 1970, Ford had had enough and quietly put the Corsair out of its misery. About 300,000 were made, but only a few hundred are thought to be left today. Which, if you ask me, is 299,500 more than anyone ever needed. Ah yes, the Ford Mustang, the stuff of muscle car legend, a name that conjures up images of roaring V8s, smoky burnouts, and American freedom. Except, what if I told you that, before all that glory, Ford's first Mustang concept wasn't a muscle car at all? In fact, it had a V4 engine. Back in 1962, Ford had an idea. A small, lightweight, mid-engine sports car inspired by the P-51 Mustang fighter plane. Sounds cool, right? Well, in theory, yes. But what they actually came up with was the Mustang I, a car that sat so low to the ground, just 28.8 inches to the top of the hood, that driving one felt like you were lying down on the pavement at high speed. Underneath its fiberglass body sat a 1.5-liter V4 engine, churning out a thrilling 106 horsepower and a top speed of 117 miles per hour. Now, let's put that into perspective. That's about as much power as a modern-day economy hatchback, only with the added benefit of making you feel like you're in a go-kart of doom. And here's the best part. Ford actually considered putting this thing into production. But then, after a few moments of common sense, they realized something. Nobody wanted a Mustang that sounded like a sewing machine and had the power of a toaster. So, they scrapped the idea, reworked the concept, and 2 years later, gave us the Mustang we actually wanted. A proper fire-breathing muscle car with a V8. Still, it's bizarre to think that the Mustang, the king of American muscle, almost started life as a tiny, mid-engine V4-powered oddity. Imagine how different car history would have been if that had happened. Actually, don't imagine it. It's too horrifying. And now we take a massive leap forward. We've gone from quirky fiberglass coupes and vibrating Ford experiments to something that can obliterate racetracks, the Porsche 919 Hybrid. Now you might be thinking, hold on, a Porsche with a V4? And yes, that's exactly what this is. But don't get ahead of yourself because unlike the rattly old Corsair or the underwhelming Matra, this V4 actually works, and it works brilliantly. At the heart of the Porsche 919 Hybrid sits a 2.0-liter turbocharged V4 engine, which powers the rear axle. On its own, it produces just under 500 horsepower. Not bad. But here's where things get interesting. The front axle is powered by a lithium-ion battery, which brings the total output to nearly 900 horsepower. Now, that's the kind of V4 power we can get behind. This thing isn't just quick, it's mind-blowing. 0 to 120 miles per hour in 4.8 seconds. Top speed? 230 miles per hour. And just to prove it wasn't messing around, it broke the all-time lap record at Spa Francorchamps. Previously set by, you guessed it, a Formula One car. So, while most V4-powered cars spent their time rattling themselves apart or getting laughed out of showrooms, Porsche decided to use one to rewrite racing history. Typical Porsche.